be an eternal optimist. I think this is fantastic. You know more about the universe than Galileo did. Keep pursuing your dreams. There's a pretty good chance that it'll happen. So, in the very first lecture, often I write down my entire name on the blackboard. Last name, it keeps going on the, and right after the 12th letter, people start laughing because it's still going. And Jeff used to joke that this was in 1983, that there were 10 people doing neural networks in all of North America, including Canada. And out of those 10, 6 were in that room, even the simplest living thing, which is a cell. So they pursue simple goals. They are not intentionally goal driven like people are. So they are somewhere in the spectrum between molecules and people.
Namaskar and welcome to this edition of Professor Mahesh podcast. This podcast is your source for helping you make informed career decisions. It is supported by IITM Global, an initiative of the Office of Global Engagement at IIT Madras. IITM Global is an initiative that helps take everything IIT Madras, our thinking, our research, our teaching, our startups, all to the global audience. You can learn more at the link below in the description. For today's conversation, I have someone whose work I have adored from the sidelines, a polymath by the very definition of what the word would mean by the dictionary, and a person who is also a very well-read and deep thinker. Most recently, he's been elected as the fellow of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering. Professor Venkat from Columbia University. Thank you very much, Professor Venkat, for making time to join us in this conversation today.
Thank you, Mahesh. It's a delight to sit down and to have this conversation with you. As you were introducing yourself, I was just thinking back by maybe 3 decades or so when I first met you at Purdue University when you were a young PhD student.
Yeah.
And so all those memories kind of flashed back. And so it's a delight to be here. And I was intrigued by this podcast that you're doing, and that's why I decided to accept it and see where it takes us.
Thank you. You know, when I first met you, and I didn't meet you personally, but I met your students. And they were my roommates, and I had a chance to talk about the problems they were working on. And that was the very first time I heard the word AI, artificial intelligence. This is early 90s. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, when you were making these India visits back then and you were trying to explain what you were working on to someone in India, maybe your parents or your old uncles, what would you do to help them understand it?
Right. Well, these are interesting but difficult questions. Let's see. Um, as you mentioned, I did start doing AI, even though, AI is very hot, and many people think because of all the headlines it's been grabbing in the recent years, it's probably a 5-year-old field. But in chemical engineering alone, it's about 40 years old. And AI as a discipline was founded in the mid-50s. So it's much older than the practice of it in engineering disciplines. So I joke that I've been doing AI for 40 years, but nobody returned my calls for the first 35. Only in the last 5 years I've been getting all this attention. So I started doing AI in the Jurassic Age, as it were. And since we are sitting in IIT Madras campus, I just want to mention that the very first talk on AI I gave in India was here in IIT Madras in 1986.
Wow.
I had just started as an assistant professor at Columbia in 85. And in 86, I visited Madras. It was still called Madras at the time. And Professor Anand, he was not the director yet, but Anand and I, as you know, we share the same guru. Our PhD advisor, Keith Gubbins. And so Anand has known me for many years, and he knows that I was the black sheep in Keith Gubbins's among his students, the only one who went away, who's, kind of uh, strayed away from the main area, which was thermodynamics. So he knew that I was doing some things in artificial intelligence. So he was curious, and so he asked me to come and give a talk. And so that was in '86. And the AI of that era was called expert systems. That was the hottest thing. So expert systems were the LLMs of the '80s. It was very hot. Startup companies were being founded and all that. And it was hard to explain what AI was. Now people sort of get it because they kind of use it in many ways. Google Maps is an AI-based application. People are used to automatic translators, which do a pretty good job. And people are used to Alexa and Siri and other, voice-based assistants, and of course ChatGPT. We can forget that. But in early 80s, artificial intelligence seemed very esoteric. And even in computer science, it was not a hot area. Only a small percentage did that. And within even AI, the people who did neural networks were even much smaller. And in fact, neural networks was even considered to be a dead end. The guy I worked with for my postdoc, as you know, Jeff Hinton at Carnegie Mellon, he was a struggling assistant professor at the time. I was his second postdoc. And Jeff used to joke that this was in 1983, that there were 10 people doing neural networks in all of North America, including Canada. And out of those 10, 6 were in that room. That is our group meeting. So wow. No one believed in it. So it is really surprising for me to see how far AI has come along and how far neural networks have come along. And but it was harder to explain what it was in those days. So we would make up some stories like, imagine, this and that is automated. For technical audience, you could explain things like control is automated, computers open and close valves. Imagine doing other kinds of automation like decision making. And so it's a stretch, but it's a little easier now.
And talk of Jeff Hinton, you worked with him when he was, like you said, a struggling assistant professor, and you've built on this whole body of literature, and you've stayed with it. When how do you stay with a dead end area of research? What made you stay with it?
Good question. I've asked myself that many times. It helps if you're a little bit mad, okay, and I also think that it's helpful when you're young and foolish, that you don't know certain things are impossible to do, or at least the community has decided, this is a dead end, this won't work. And it's, in youthful optimism, you think that maybe I'll see something that others have missed. And so in my case, it actually, it's a little more beyond that. And it started actually right across the SP road. We are in the Sardar Patel road, where on one side you have IIT Madras, and the other side is AC Tech, Argap Chettiar College of Technology, as you know, which is my alma mater. That's where I did my undergraduate work in chemical engineering. So there, I fell in love with physics, basically, and physics is still my first love. I think as a subject, it is absolutely fascinating. That particularly when you read and when you learn about the theories of quantum mechanics and special theory of relativity of Einstein's and general theory, and later on quantum field theory and all that. It is amazing how you can start with a very simple, reasonable assumptions about the universe or matter and interactions. And just by using mathematics, you can pretty much explain everything about the inanimate universe. It doesn't say anything about life and consciousness, and that's, of course, the next frontier. But it is absolutely stunning how much you can deduce just from a few assumptions and clever use of mathematics, and that has always fascinated me and continues to fascinate me. So, as I was learning about these subjects, one of the things that crossed my mind was uh, how does the brain work? In two ways. One is, how does it discover all these things? How does the human brain? Now, obviously, these were discovered by gifted brains, such as you have Einstein, of course, and then Newton, and then a whole bunch of other people who discovered quantum mechanics. So, how do these discoveries happen? And secondly, how does the brain itself work? What would be the physics, as it were, of the brain, and what would be a mathematical framework that would model the brain successfully? And so that's a problem I've been interested for 50 years now, more than 50 years, since my undergraduate work in ACETIC, across the road from here. So, so after I did thermodynamics at statistical thermodynamics at Cornell with Keith Gubbins, this question came back again. Statistical mechanics is the intellectual framework for explaining the collective behavior of millions of agents, actually trillions of agents. But the agents are not smart in the sense they don't make decisions like molecules, for example. They are merely prisoners of Newton's laws. They simply follow F equals ma. And so they go and if you take a gas molecule in a container, a molecule goes and bumps against the wall and container wall, and it doesn't complain, saying, "Oh, that hurt, and I'm not doing that again." It'll come back and bounce again. Simply follow F equals ma. And the description of that, mathematical description of that, is statistical mechanics. So I asked myself the question, so what would StatMech look like if the individual agents were goal-driven? That is, they go and bump against and say, "No, this hurts. I don't like it. I'm going to do something else." So what would StatMech look like for millions of interacting agents where the agents are pursuing goals? I thought of that because I thought the neural network, the brain as a neural network, is a little bit like that. Our human brain has roughly 100 billion neurons. And the neurons are not like molecules. Neurons are living things. So the living things, at the very least, have a survival purpose or a survival goal. So they are goal-driven. And so...
Even at the individual neuron level, you believe there is something different. It's not just a passive entity.
Right. Even at the any living thing, even the simplest living thing, which is a cell, is certainly it's made of molecules, obviously, and then there are reactions taking place. There are structures, molecular structures, and so on. So they are made up of molecules, but they are different from molecules as an entity. So they pursue simple goals like survival, but they are not overtly or intentionally goal-driven like people are. So they are somewhere in the spectrum between molecules and people. And so what would StatMech look like? And that is the problem I was thinking about, even though that was not my thesis area. And it so happened at that time, this was 1982, John Hopfield visited Cornell to deliver a seminar in physics on his recent work on neural networks. Now we call them Hopfield networks, and for that work, he got half of the Nobel Prize last year, as you know.
Sure.
And the other half went to my postdoc advisor, Jeff Hinton. So when I attended his talk in 82, and his approach made a lot of sense to me. I mean, I still had some questions about the framework, but overall, I thought this was a meaningful way to attack, modeling the brain problem. And so that's how I became interested in AI, and that took me to Hinton and everything. So during the nuclear winter part of these things, that is, nobody was paying any attention. Um, I mentioned that it's helpful that if you're half crazy, that you believe this will finally work out. I also hedged my bet a little bit by working on mainstream AI. At that time, the mainstream AI was expert systems.
Sure.
So a good part of my work was on these expert system or classical AI based ideas. That was crazy enough for chemical engineering. Anyway, nobody believed in it in chemical engineering. So, but at least they tolerated it. And then I had to wait for the neural network revolution to come along, and that took another 20 years or so.
Wow. From chemical engineering with an interest in physics to now being an acknowledged expert in AI for real engineering. Where did you, what was the classroom Eureka moments? I'm sure you talked of Hopfield's lecture. What were the 2, 3 classes that you took along the way that really triggered this thinking in you? And what is the message for a young student out there today that says, this is what I could be doing today to sort of find my own Eureka?
Right, right. No, that's a good question. First of all, I just want to tell people that uh, life is full of possibilities, and even the thing that seemed very remote and almost impossible can become possible. Neural networks were considered to be an impossible dead-end avenue, and that all changed dramatically in the last 5 years. Another example, slightly tangential, story I want to mention here is when I first learned quantum mechanics here in ACTech, and that was around 1972. I was a first-year undergraduate student in chemical engineering across the road. And I was absolutely fascinated. I continue to be fascinated by these really, really strange ideas in quantum mechanics. The whole idea of, wave function, uncertainty principle. You cannot measure momentum in space, position at this same time with infinite accuracy, and so on. Um, and then and mathematically you can actually express these crazy ideas and make predictions, and then the experiments actually confirm them. And so when I was learning that, um, I never thought that this year we are celebrating the birth centenary of quantum mechanics in 1925. Pretty much this month, in June of 1925, is when Heisenberg discovered his version of quantum mechanics, which is known as matrix mechanics. And he discovers that when he's recovering from a hay fever episode in a remote island north of Germany called Helgoland in 1925. I read about all those things in 1972, here as an undergrad. I never thought at that when I was learning these things that 50 years, in 50 years' time, I would be actually on that very island with 300 other physicists celebrating the birth centenary of quantum mechanics. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Helgoland. And when I was walking there, and we went around places where Heisenberg might have visited, and there were lots of, there was a week-long conference. There were 5 Nobel laureates there, including the 2 who got the Nobel Prize for experimental verification of quantum entanglement, what Einstein called as spooky action at a distance.
Sure.
And so I was just thinking 50 years ago when I learned this in ACTech, I had no idea that I will be here, celebrating the birth centenary. So I'm mentioning this because life is full of possibilities, So number one, so don't rule out anything. So for the young minds, I just want to tell them that. So keep pursuing your dreams. There's a pretty good chance that it'll happen. And Eureka moments, pretty much everything, all of those happened either in math or in physics classes. First in undergraduate here, Um, Again, it is the two things that struck me were in how simple intuitive ideas in physics can be built into elaborate theories of surprising accuracy in their predictions. For example, special theory of relativity is founded on two simple postulates, which Einstein came up with. The first postulate says, physics in inertial frames, that is, constant velocity observers, physics should appear the same for all those people. It seems reasonable because no one is preferred over anyone else. So what I do in my lab should be the same in the other lab. And then velocity of light is a universal constant. From this, and you apply math, and you discover, everything including E equals mc squared comes out of this. That to me was almost magical. How does this happen? And then the power of mathematics. The power of mathematics continues to surprise me. And so those were the Eureka moment.
Sometimes I feel when you now cross the frontier from the inanimate
Yeah,
to the animate,
yeah.
Is the power of mathematics a bit overrated, or do you still believe in the power of mathematics?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The you know the biologists make a joke. I mean, I have friends who do systems biology and so on, where the power of mathematics is brought to play a little bit. They joke that for a physicist, has to model a cow, for example, they would say consider a spherical cow. Remember? So clearly, the intricate behavior of us, of cells and organs and many of these living things, and then going beyond to conscious things such as people, math seems to have certain limitations. It is not as successful as it is in physics and in chemistry. Biology introduces a new twist, which is the idea of life, and then biological things aggregating together, they exhibit even more complex behavior. But nevertheless, even there, collective properties, mathematics can be very helpful in making certain broad conclusions about how a population might behave, and that those kinds of models are used in ecology, for example, these days. But one has to realize the limitations of math, no matter how enthusiastic one might be about it. You are absolutely right.
We'll come to that in a bit. Math applied to the world of life. You've worked in it. We'll come to that a little later. Let's go back to your postdoc days.
Yeah.
Working with Jeff Hinton would have been, looking back, a bit like performing with a garage band that was to later become the Beatles. Did you see early signs of the Beatles in there, or what kept you? What was it like?
Yeah. It was a group of you're right, like a bit like ragtag musicians, putting together things. There were lots of talented students and postdocs in the group at that time. Jeff was at Carnegie Mellon only for 5 years, from 82 to 87. Then he moved to Toronto, University of Toronto. I worked during a period when the backprop algorithm had not been rediscovered, which, that paper from Jeff came in 86 with Williams and Rumelhart. So this was pre-backprop days. So it was really difficult to train neural networks on large problems. And this was during the early days of the Boltzmann machine project, for which he got the other half of the Nobel Prize, as I mentioned. And so it was very clear to me that Jeff was very unique. He had a vision which others did not have, even in computer science at the time. And even once over our weekly lunch, I asked him, so early on actually, so how is that you seem so convinced that this neural network thing would work, while pretty much everyone is opposed to it, even at CMU at the time. And in fact, if you look at the CMU faculty guide in 1983, I have a copy of it in my office at Columbia, and there you have about 100 different topics, and for each topic, it will list all the professors and postdocs working on that area. So computer vision, there'll be like 20, 30 people. Robotics, the guy who founded Boston Dynamics, for example, Mark Rabid, he was an associate professor there at that time. And so robotics, you had a whole bunch of people, natural language processing, speech understanding. And you look at the listing for neural networks, there are only 3 names mentioned. Jeff Hinton and his 2 postdocs. The first postdoc was Dave Turetsky, who's still there, and myself, and nobody else. So that tells you how popular neural networks were at the time. And so I asked him, so how do you, why do you think this business would work? He said, Venkat, it's very simple. Inside our skull, we know the brain is a neural network. That we know for sure because people have cut open and looked at it, and so they've done slices of it. So we know the hardware is a network, and we know it works because you and I are sitting here talking about it. So we know it works. I just have to figure out how it works. So it seemed like he said, look, we have an existence proof that it is a network and it works. We just have to figure out what the algorithm is. And essentially, that's what he managed to do by and large. It took about 40 years, from the time he started to, say, 2012 is when people started believing in deep neural nets and so on. So that was, that gave me an indication that, this might go somewhere, that the garage band might turn into Beatles, as you put it. So, yeah, that was an early indication.
And then you went off to Purdue. That's where I crossed paths with you. And you spent 23 years there and then moved to Columbia. Your faculty journey has taken you to the best places. Tell us a little bit about what a really good university should look like. I want our audience to understand what life would be like for a faculty member. What is your view of that?
Right. Well, I've been very fortunate, as in the sense
from Cornell, PhD at Cornell.
Yeah, I've been associated with some of the best institutions in the world, and I've been fortunate to have had amazingly talented PhD students and postdocs as well. So, these days, the big problems that you want to attack and solve, they cannot be done by a single person. You really need a large team. Even for Jeff Hinton, as talented he has had some amazing and students and postdocs to work with over the years. And gone are the days, invoking Albert Einstein as an example, where he single-handedly solved relativity. Even quantum mechanics was not a one-man's game. There were several people involved, at least half a dozen people. So these days, you really need to have a number of talented researchers working with you. So a great university, I think, basically is the way I would characterize it is it gives you a lot of intellectual freedom. So even though, for example, Carnegie Mellon, most people there did not believe in neural networks at that time in the 80s, they still hired Jeff and gave him a chance. And some of the important works for which he later became famous for was done there. So this tolerance of diverse views, things that you don't necessarily agree with, may not even believe in, but giving them a chance I think that's an extremely important quality that an institution, academic institution particularly, needs to have. And so the great universities nurture young talent, even with crazy ideas. I think that's the strength of many of these American universities. They are open to these things. And secondly, the idea of the tenure system. You know, they vet you, of course. It takes 6, 7, 8 years to get tenure. Once you are tenured, you have the job for life, as you know. Um, and and that is there for you to pursue the really difficult problems, which that at least you have the job. You may or may not succeed, but nobody is going to come back and say, well, your idea didn't work out, you'll have to leave. So it encourages risk taking, going after big questions, and that was very instrumental in several examples where people made big discoveries because they didn't have to worry about this. And this openness to ideas and discussions and tolerance of different views, these are some, I would say, qualities that the great institutions have. And certainly, I enjoyed that at Purdue, and they continue to at Columbia and so on.
Interesting. We'll come back to that a little later because I want a part of this conversation to focus on what it takes to be a good faculty member, and we'll come back to that. Let's talk about AI and AI meeting the human world, whether it be the engineering world or the more casual world around us. You've seen AI evolve from being a symbolic engine to today, where we're dealing with a trillion parameters in one of the large language models. I know you are a fan of Test cricket. If AI was a Test cricket match, what day, what session are we on?
Good one. It is certainly more of a test cricket than a one day cricket or T20. It's a much longer engagement. I would still say we are in the first inning of even the opening inning. Maybe certainly we are in the first day or at most the second day. Okay, because it hasn't. There are a number of key questions AI hasn't answered yet. One is, what is consciousness? This is the question that got me interested in this at AC Tech. So an individual neuron is not self-aware, but you hook 100 billion of them in a particular way, and the whole thing is self-aware. So how does that happen? We don't have a clue yet. And the question I'm asking is, what is the mathematics of consciousness? Okay. That's a very difficult question because we can't even define what consciousness is yet. Then you have to come up with a mathematical framework that explains it. Now, one thought that I've been thinking about for a while is maybe it requires a new mathematics that we have not invented yet. If you look at the history of scientific progress in the last 400 years, roughly, modern science as we know it started in 1600s with Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, who was carefully plotting the movements of the planets, including Mars, and had very, very precise data. And so he was the very first careful experimenter documenting the movements of planets. And it is that data that is his postdoc used to discover the laws of planetary motion. I am, of course, talking about Johannes Kepler. Kepler was Tycho Brahe's postdoc. And in fact, there is an island called Wien near Copenhagen. So from Copenhagen, you take a ferry in the summer. It's about an hour's drive. You can go to this island where Tycho Brahe lived and worked for 25 years, plotting the movements of planets. every single day, including Christmas and New Year, through even bitter winter, he was there taking measurements and very precise measurements. And it is that measurement that Kepler used to discover the three laws of motion. The first law took him about 10 years. And then other two, number two and three, another 10 years or so. It's a 20-year work. So if you go back to the beginnings of modern science, which started with Bach, then came Galileo, and Galileo and Kepler, they were more or less contemporaries, and it is all that progress which Isaac Newton benefited from in formulating his Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation and so on. So if you look at the last 400 years, whenever physics needed a mathematical framework to explain a problem, such as quantum mechanics or relativity, the math already existed. For example, for Einstein, for general theory of relativity, the underlying mathematics is nonlinear geometry developed by Riemann. And that work had been done 50 years before Einstein needed it. And quantum mechanics, when Heisenberg discovered his version, he didn't realize that what he had done, was he had reinvented rediscovered matrix multiplication. So matrices existed before they were needed. The only time I can think of in the last 400 years when physics needed math and the math wasn't there and it had to be invented was Newton's law of gravitation. In predicting the Kepler's laws from the inverse square law, Newton had to invent calculus. That is the only occasion. And so I suspect the math for consciousness might exist already, but it's possible that we may have to come up with an entirely new mathematical framework. So this is an open question. So AI is still in the early innings. And so, people are talking about AGI, for example, and artificial general intelligence. And that is, going towards that, we still have to sort out these fundamental questions.
You worked in applying expert systems then, and now AI to process systems engineering. That's an example where AI is meeting the real world and making a difference. Is AI today, you think, opening and closing valves? And how far are we in bringing AI into real engineering? And where do you see the challenges?
Right. So I actually have written a couple of papers on this very question. I see the opportunities and challenges along four categories. The easiest in building AI models are those applications where lots of good data is available, and then one can use more or less the fairly ready-made machine learning techniques that are out there, whether they're deep neural networks or transformers or random forests and so on. So those are, I call them easy problems, because people showed how to do these things even 30 years ago, in the early applications of neural networks and so on. So that can be done, and that is already happening in industry. I know there are people in pharma industry who are putting this to use. I have friends in the oil and gas industry in the US who are doing this. So this is already happening, where AI is solving real practical problems, but then problems which have this advantage with lots of data available, and then you can do that. The next hard problem, this is easy. So the next category is hard. Hard problems are those where the amount of data is not that much. Not all of, we talk about big data these days and so on. That is true in certain disciplines like chess, game playing programs, natural language, computer vision, where there is data available. But there are many problems in material science and chemical engineering where it takes a long time to do the experiments. So the experiments are harder to do. It takes a long time, and so it's very expensive, and data is very limited. And so, for those kind of problems, you have to combine first principles knowledge, the fundamentals of physics and chemistry, with data science. Okay, and for a very important reason. So, in things like um, movie recommendations and restaurant recommendations, like Yelp, let's say, recommends a restaurant, and you go there with your wife or date for dinner, and let's say the food was disappointing. You probably lost a couple of hours and maybe a couple of $100, and hopefully nobody died. Then the Yelp rating would be really bad. So, and maybe your partner is mad at you. Okay, but in chemical engineering, when these models make a mistake, reactors can explode. People can die.
Sure.
So the cost of a mistake in chemical engineering, nuclear engineering, aerospace, even pharmaceutical engineering, is very high compared to movie recommendations and restaurant recommendations. So we cannot trust black box models in those kinds of applications, which means they have to be fortified, strengthened with fundamental principles. So how do you put physics and chemistry into data science models? Now that is, that's not an easy problem. I think that'll take another 5 to 10 years to solve routinely. Harder still is building ontologies, which is building knowledge structures. And then the fourth category, which I think is the hardest, is behavior. This is emergence of collective intelligence. This is like the brain problem. This individual neuron is not self-aware, but collectively, the whole system is self-aware. Or if you see how ants build ant colonies, there are millions of ants which build sophisticated structures, under the ground for their, living. Each ant is not particularly impressive. It is capable of doing certain things, but then when you put millions of them together, they somehow self-organize, and a collective intelligence emerges. I define here intelligence as problem-solving capability. So here, collectively, they are able to carve out, transport all the sand out, and then build a sophisticated colony where they have living space, they store food in one area, they even have cemeteries for ants. The dead ants are not lying everywhere. They're all collected and they're put in one place. So, entomologists and ecologists have studied these things very carefully. So my interest is, how does collective intelligence emerge through a self-organized fashion? And so that's the hardest problem, I think. And so when you look at these things, we are still early in the test series.
So while you nudge a problem from get the easy wins under the belt and then move towards the harder wins, especially in real engineering, chemical engineering is a classic case in point. Safety is paramount, and you've said this, right? So safety is usually, even today, a rule-based system, the final frontier. Is it possible that, how do you marry this rule-based system with a database system and gradually let the database system take over? Is there a framework that you think will work?
Yeah, people are evolving such frameworks. We have done some work in that area ourselves, and it is not clear. There are two questions. One is implied in what you asked me. One is the question is whether there is a universal framework where somehow you can integrate the symbolic AI, the classical AI of the 60s and 70s and 80s, which is expressed finally as rule-based systems, and combining them with machine learning and data science of the modern era, whether there is a universal framework or it may be a collection of techniques. That is, you do it one way for one class of problems, do it something differently for another class. We don't know that yet. People are working on those kinds of questions. How do we integrate these things? It's too early to tell.
We've talked about this. I think going to problems where life could be in the balance. I think we seem to be more comfortable with a rule-based system still. Um, you in an early conversation a long time ago, or actually in the talk that you gave, you talked of how we are in an era a bit like having a steam engine doing the work but still not knowing the thermodynamics explaining it. Is that what you think will be the last straw to help us completely transition to a database system away from rules?
Right. So, as you mentioned, I think of the current state of LLMs like the steam engines at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So, if you look at early 1800s, steam engines had been invented by James Watt and I think Newcomb and a whole bunch of people, and then immediately put to use in factories, coal mines, and transporting people, railways, and so on. So there were engineers who invented these things and immediately put it to applications. In fact, there were companies started, and there was the equivalent of the startup, fervor that we have now. In the early 1800s, some of these guys made a lot of money.
Sure.
But the science of steam engines, as you know, took a long time to come. It actually took about 75 years, from 1800s to 1875. It took 75 years for the science of steam engines, which we know today as thermodynamics, and the people who developed the science were not the people who invented the technology. There were entirely different characters, like Carnot, who proposed the Carnot cycle, and then Clausius, who discovered entropy. Then you have Gibbs, you have Boltzmann, Kelvin, Maxwell, and these are the people who developed the science of steam engines, which is thermodynamics, and that took 75 years. So, in a similar way, I think the LLMs are the steam engines of the automated cognition revolution. What we have now is it's automated cognition. So, what is cognition is the ability to reason and make decisions. Now, computers are doing it. And so,
Parallels are uncanny.
parallels are uncanny.
These are energy guzzling engines today.
Exactly. So we have we are at the dawn. We are very fortunate to be at the very birth of the automated cognition revolution, which is going to take humanity to all kinds of places. Some of them may not be so good, but we are at the beginning. We are just like being in the 1800s when the steam engines were discovered, or invented. And here we have automated cognition, and LLMs are the steam engines of this revolution, and we are applying them everywhere. They are used in speech understanding, ChatGPT kind of applications. But what the question I'm asking is, what is the science of LLMs? That is, what is the thermodynamics of LLMs to make the parallel? And we don't have it yet. We have a whole bunch of tricks. Even backprop is a training algorithm. It's not a theory of LLMs. Transformer is also, it's a structural invention. It's not a theory. So we don't have a theory of LLMs, a science of LLMs. And that is a huge opportunity for us intellectually. And it's very exciting. And that's what my students and I work on. And it is still early in the game. And that's why I keep saying that we are probably in the first innings of the game.
You've seen, I'm sure, multiple successes, in terms of predictions come out of the work from your lab. Early on or mid-career, what was the one spectacular failure prediction that came out of your lab that taught you something interesting, something worth remembering?
Something that failed, or something
that you thought would happen, but turned out quite the contrary.
Okay. I got the timing entirely wrong. When your good friend and a fellow IIT Madras, colleague, Professor Raghu Rangaswamy, when Raghu was a PhD student in my lab, 1990 to 95, at that time we developed a whole bunch of techniques for automated fault diagnosis and process safety applications and so on. And we even developed in '96 system. Today, we would call it agentic AI.
Okay.
So it was an agentic AI system, but the agents were using expert system ideas, not neural network ideas. In fact, one of the agents was a neural network, but the rest were expert system and math models and so on. So it was essentially an agentic AI for fault diagnosis. It was called Diagnostic Toolkit. DKIT was the name we gave the system. We demonstrated that on actual data from an Exxon refinery, and it diagnosed the faults ahead of the operators and correctly. So we got excited. So this is a big breakthrough, and then Honeywell thought so too. So Honeywell licensed this technology from us in 1996. It's the first AI for supervisory control kind of applications that was licensed from a university, at least in the U.S. And I thought this will translate into actual commercial applications maybe in the next 5 years. Honeywell thought so too. This was 1996. We are now sitting here having this conversation in 2025. 30 years later, we still don't have it. We couldn't do it then because I had underestimated, and also others, the amount of hardware and software and memory demands needed for going from a proof of concept research prototype to a commercial, application. This was even before internet was, existed. So it was due to those limitations. Even though we showed how to model this and how to solve it, and even used real-world data to demonstrate it, you couldn't scale it up. The hardware, software, and memory limitations, communication limitations were too big. Now, it has remained challenging until now. Only in the last few years, the hardware, software, all those challenges have gone away. Now, you can do AI at that scale. And so I think it'll begin to happen next. So I got the timing entirely wrong. We were 30 years too early to solve that problem. I thought it'll see its life in 5 years, but I'm still waiting.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was one spectacular, mistake there in getting the timing.
Sure. Let's go back to your first love, physics.
Yeah.
And you've stuck with it. And your most recent book talks of how you applied it to the world of economics. The book is titled "How Much Inequality is Fair." How much inequality is fair?
Right. Yeah. I use a particular technical definition of fairness because fairness is a slightly elusive concept. In fact, that's why when you read about, say, books or articles or papers which talk about fairness is usually in quotes. They would put quotes around it because, it could mean different things to different people.
Sure.
But I was able to distill our notion of fairness to, I think, certain commonsensical things that we all intuitively understand, even animals understand. For example, equal pay for equal work. That's a definition of fairness. Okay. And then if there are two things which are equal in every respect, let's say that each one has certain properties and that these two things are equal in those respects, and you treat one preferentially over the others, people would immediately cry foul. And they will say unfair. It happens in basketball games, in games, happens in all games. That's why you have a referee. The referee's job is whether he's being fair, in the sense, are you treating equal things equally, okay? There is an interesting experiment that some years ago, psychologists, behavioral psychologists did with monkeys. Apparently, my memory is a bit hazy on this, but I'm giving you the gist of this experiment. They have two different monkeys in two different cages. They can look at each other. And so the scientist comes, and apparently monkeys prefer grapes over peanuts. I mean, they love peanuts, but they love grapes more, apparently.
Cucumbers. That's the experiment.
Cucumbers also. Okay. So what the scientist does is comes and gives a task to one monkey, like a pull a lever or something. That monkey performs the task. As a reward, it gives grapes. The other monkey is watching this. Okay. Then he comes over to this cage and gives the second monkey the same task. It also pulls the lever. And then for the reward, gives peanuts. And the monkey knows that the other one got grapes, which is what this also would like. But it got peanuts. Literally, it got peanuts. And it throws it back on the face of the scientist. Because what it is protesting is the unfairness. Right. So even animals understand this level of, look, I did the same thing. Why am I getting peanuts? So even at the animal level, people instinctively understand what is fairness and what is unfair. So what I define as fairness mathematically in my book is that I define that when you perform a job, you're performing something useful, you're delivering some value, and in return, you're being paid. And that salary that you get, the salary per se doesn't matter, but it's the utility of the salary that you model. And there's a whole bunch of 100 years of economic literature on this. It's called diminishing marginal utility of an income. So they can model the income part as a utility. Then in order to earn that income, you have to put in some work that's called disutility. And then you have to compete with all your colleagues for promotion and so on. So you can express all these things as an effective utility function. And in my theory, when everyone gets the same effective utility as a reward, that's the fairest outcome. And it turns out it leads to a log normal distribution of income in an ideal free market society. And in actual societies, we observe that the bottom 97% follow log normal, but the top 3% follow something called a power law. And our theory explains why that happens also, but that's the gist of the whole thing.
It's interesting that you finally concluded on the log normal, as uncannily close it is to the Maxwellian distribution of velocities in a stat thermo description of a gas. How did economists take to the fact that a chemical engineering is lecturing them?
Right. Not very well. The key idea here turns out to be entropy. So you asked, how did the mathematical approach evolve? And because of my training in statistical thermodynamics with Professor Keith Govins and so on, I realized it took me about 10 years to unlearn the the message we were taught about entropy. Entropy, we are told, is a measure of disorder, and then equilibrium is reached when you have maximum disorder. The molecules are spread all over and so on. And it took me 10 years to realize that this is a limited interpretation. And then the correct interpretation of entropy is that it's actually a measure of fairness. And how so, you may ask? So, for example, if you take a container, and let's say that you divide that into two halves, and then put a diaphragm in between, and put all the molecules on one side, and there is no molecule in the other side. Now, when I remove this, quickly all the molecules will disperse, and statistical equilibrium will be reached when the molecules are spread all over. And now, if I were to tell you that when they were all compressed on one side, if you were to ask, what is the probability of finding a molecule on the left half of the one side of the box? It will be 1 because they're all there. What is the probability of finding any molecule on the right-hand side? It is 0. Once I remove it, I ask, what is the probability of finding a molecule on the left half? You'll say 0.5. What is it on the right half? It's 0.5. But if I were to say, no, remember they all used to be on the left half before you removed the diaphragm, So they are going to be more likely to be there. So I would say it's 0.7, 0.3. You would say, no, that's an unfair assignment of probabilities. The fairest assignment is equal probability. So entropy is really a measure of fairness in a distribution. Okay? It so happens that that leads to a maximum disorder, but it is not disorder itself. Now, this is the problem economists have always had. When people try to apply statistical mechanics to economics, and they will say, well, economic systems will reach equilibrium when there is maximum disorder, they will say, why would we know our markets work well when there is more order. Why would I want to maximize disorder? This conceptual block has stopped from, as economists believing entropy is a measure of disorder, and that's why they object to any stat-mech treatment. So I've shown that by maximizing entropy, you're actually maximizing fairness. That makes economic sense. We know that markets work when everyone feels they are getting a fair deal. And so there's a lot of resistance to these ideas because of the misunderstanding they've had about entropy for about 100 years now. And hopefully that will change going forward.
Underlying this whole thing is a framework of, as you said, motivated individuals, StatMech for motivated individuals, and you've given it the name Statistical Teleodynamics. Tell us a little bit about what's different about that framework from the standard Boltzmann StatMech framework.
Right. So going back to my remark that molecules don't make decisions and that they are prisoners of Newton's laws. Simply, they follow F equals MAD. Whatever force that's acting on the molecule is going to determine its fate. The molecule has no control over its fate. Whereas individuals, you and I, and even animals to a lesser degree, have some control over their fate because they know what they like, they don't like. They pursue goals. They basically pursue utility. They want to increase. I mean, this is what Darwin said, right? I mean, the survival of the fittest is actually survival of the one which has the... What is fitness? Fitness is a measure of utility.
Sure.
So survival of the utility is really Darwinian idea. So every living thing tries to have more utility. Humans, we want to switch to jobs which pay better salaries, better title, better perks, and so on. We want to marry partners who are better looking or better capable in some ways, and so on. Again, we are pursuing utility. The same things animals do. Even cells do that. Bacteria, for example, when in a phenomenon known as chemotaxis, they know how to locate food source, and they will swim towards that. They are again pursuing utility. So, in the Greek word for goal is telos. So, goal-driven systems, I came up with the name teleodynamics. Instead of statistical thermodynamics, when you apply it to goal-driven systems, I call it statistical teleodynamics. In thermodynamics, the dynamics of the agents are driven by thermal agitation. Whereas in teleodynamics, like the behavior of an economic system with millions of people buying and selling goods and services, their dynamics of switching jobs and etc. is driven by their goals, hence it's teleodynamics. So the problem was when I first asked this question, I didn't know how to bring in this idea of goal into statistical mechanics. There's no idea of goal in statistical mechanics. Conceptually, it is not there. Molecules don't have goals. So there is no way to accommodate this idea of utility in this. Then it took me a while. Then I figured out the way to do it is to take ideas from statistical mechanics and combine it with game theory. Because game theory is all about goal-driven strategic decision making. Molecules make random decisions. People make strategic decisions. Combining these things, I found a way and bring in utility into statistical mechanics picture and retain the entropy idea. And entropy now becomes a measure of fairness. And then all the math works out. And then when I take like the two laws of statistical thermodynamics, I have two laws of statistical teleodynamics. And then when I take the teleodynamic laws and make my agents goal-free, like molecules, I get all of statistical thermodynamics as a special case. The Boltzmann distribution comes out. So the log normal distribution in economics is the equivalent of the Boltzmann distribution, the exponential distribution for energy. So there's
Very
sort of a
interesting.
one-to-one mapping there.
In all of this, it's you in this conversation have already talked about. We've alluded to Newton. We've alluded to Darwin. We've alluded to indirectly to Adam Smith. It's how uncannily, again, these three individuals lived in a very tight bracket in time, evolving very similar ideas, free something. Um, let's go to your work, more current work at Columbia. You manage a center on systemic risk management. Tell us a little bit about what that center does and what is it that would cut across. I'm sure when you talk systemic risk management, you're not talking process chemical risk in a plant. What are some ideas that can cut across systems?
Right. So my interest in that area started with my home discipline, which is chemical engineering. But then I quickly realized that some of the underlying mechanisms of systemic failures cut across all disciplines. So a systemic failure or a systemic risk situation is one where the entire system collapses. This would be the example, for example, would be Bhopal, India. That disaster. Or there was an offshore oil platform in North Sea that exploded. It's known as the Piper Alpha disaster. These are systemic failures in the chemical engineering or chemical
Or the
industry
Deepwater
setting.
Horizon.
Or the Deepwater Horizon, exactly. In more recently, in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon spill of British BP's offshore oil platform, or another BP plant, a Texas City refinery that exploded. So the system is that plant or the offshore installation and so on. And I realized that when you then study the investigative reports, which usually come after these major events, it usually takes about a year, and they produce 300, 500-page report. I noticed that they don't happen because one thing going wrong. These systemic failures happen only when lots of things go wrong over a long period of time. It's not because one valve failed and boom, this thing fell apart. Or it happened very quickly and this thing fell apart. No, because it simply won't happen because that's what designers do. Designers design it in such a way that these systems will not fail because one or two things go wrong. There are layers of safety, and all those protections have been eaten away. So people take shortcuts initially. Suppose you're supposed to do certain things, and that's the standard operating procedure, SOP, and then you cut corners there. Then you see that, hey, the plant did not explode. I saved maybe half an hour in taking the shortcut. And so maybe I saved some money because I was more efficient, and the plant is still working. And then you go back the next day and you take some more shortcuts. So over time, you keep taking shortcuts, and eventually you've eaten through all the safety margins, and now you are at the bone. And that time when you take a shortcut, the system collapses. And that takes time. Sometimes it typically takes weeks. Often it takes months to years. A couple of examples I'll give you. There was a similar systemic failure in a mine in West Virginia. Also happened in 2010. There was a mine explosion. Some 26 people or so died, actually, unfortunately. And if you look at, mining in the U.S. come under a particular inspection authority. I think it's called MISHA, Mining Safety and Health Administration. It's like OSHA for other industries, occupational safety and health administration. So these inspectors will show up kind of unannounced and see whether everything is properly done. People are wearing their personal protective equipment and processes are being done carefully and so on. And if you don't, they issue citations. And in this particular mining case, you could see that leading before the disaster, about a year before that, if you look at every 3 months, the quarterly citation statistics, they were going up. Minor violations, not doing something here, the protect people were not wearing a hard hat when they did something. So things of that sort, they all got cited. And maybe somebody got injured, nobody died. And then, but we saw in the statistics that if you go back by 4 quarters or 5 quarters, there is some average level of citations. The next quarter, more. The next quarter, more. And eventually, it was going up every single quarter. So I can see here people are taking more and more risks and violating the standard operating procedures, and nothing has happened, and that encourages them to do some more. Eventually, they've eaten through the safety margins. So here is a sign of the breakdown of the safety culture in the organization. And so systemic failures don't happen overnight. They happen over a long period of time where people take these shortcuts and eventually it comes back to bite them. Same thing happened with subprime crisis.
Yep.
In finance, people were issuing these bad mortgage deals. Initially, nothing happened. Then they issued more of those. And eventually, these various mortgage instruments were mostly junk, even though they were all branded as AAA. And that developed over 2-3 years. And some people actually saw this was happening, and they were smart enough to take the opposite position. That is, This is the whole idea of the movie Big Short.
Correct.
And they made billions of dollars. So you can see that this happening there in the power failure in the Northeast, in the U.S. in 2003. There are various instances where the biggest systemic failure that we are all collectively ignoring is the climate crisis.
Yeah.
The climate change, where the system is the planet itself.
Yeah.
And we have been doing this for decades now. We know what should be done, but we are still ignoring it. And so it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So systemic failures don't happen because one thing went wrong overnight. It happens because several things go wrong over a long period of time. Sometimes you even know that is what is going on, and then you keep ignoring it because there are short-term benefits, just like there are short-term benefits in using coal as opposed to green sources of energy and power. And so I'm interested in these kinds of problems about how to study so that we can avoid these things. How do we better design, better control, better recognize that the early symptoms, and so connect the dots and see that this is not going to be good, and let's do something now. But human beings, I don't have too much confidence in us. We even though I mean, it happens at the personal level, right? We all know that we should eat right and exercise.
We don't.
How many of us do that, including myself? So, right. So I'm interested in the systemic risk kind of problems.
Your professional faculty life has you've spawned schools of thought, and you have spanned disciplines. Let's take a zoomed out view of your life from a graduate student to where you are today, a chair professor at Columbia, a fellow of the National Academy of Engineering. What advice would you have for aspiring faculty members or early career graduate students and postdocs? What would be certain takeaways for them from your own life experience?
Yeah, this is going to be somewhat limited because I'm going to just reflect on my own experience, and others might have other ways to say it. But if I were to look back, the kind of things that enabled me to do certain things was my work is always curiosity driven. I've been curious about lots of things all my life. So as a result, I have fairly broad interests. So I have deep interest in physics and mathematics. Then I have deep interest in economics and sociology and biology. And obviously, one cannot be an expert on all these things. So one has to balance these things somehow. So I've found having a very broad set of interests has been helpful for me. But you cannot be deep in every one of them. So I've chosen one or two of them to go deep. And so I combine breadth and depth, and that has been helpful. Mainly because when you have breadth, you're able to see a problem in a different discipline in an entirely new perspective that people who work only in that area are not aware of. So you're able to do some innovative things, and so for me, breadth gives me the capabilities to imagine new things that people may not have thought about. And I forget who said this. I have that quote in my book. It says that creativity is mostly seeing things that others have seen, but think things that others haven't thought about. And for that, breadth is very helpful. And the other thing I feel is, while GPA and those kinds of measures are helpful, they are more like threshold. If you have a very poor GPA, maybe you're not cut out for that particular field. But a 4.0 doesn't guarantee long-term success. I myself found empirically that students with a mixture of A's and B's, do a better job in research than straight A students, surprisingly. There are some straight A's who have done very well, but much to my surprise, I've seen some straight A's struggle. And the strength of the mixture of A's and B's is that the students who have taken a B, they know how to handle a failure, because nobody writes an exam hoping to get a B.
Sure.
Everyone writes an exam hoping to get an A, but you take a B, and that's a big blow to you. And then psychologically, they are able to handle that and learn from it, and then make sure that they don't make a B in the next course or something. So they are resilient, and resilience is a very important long-term life skill. I think we need it even for just not even as a faculty or a student, even just to get through life,
Sure.
With some level of happiness. But certainly in academics, you're gonna hear more no's than yeses. I mean, most of my proposals get denied. I mean, it has always been like that. So the resilience, tells you to get up and fight again. So, and then persistence. Like I mentioned, I think in our earlier conversation, I mentioned that we train our students to be sprinters.
Yeah.
We test them on 20-minute quizzes, 1-hour exams, 3-hour exams, and so on. And they all go to coaching classes, this and that, to answer these questions in a couple of hours and so on. So they are all trained as sprinters doing 100-meter dash, 200-meter dash, at most 400 meters. But research career, research life, is more of a decathlon event. It's not even a marathon. It's certainly a marathon, because you're going to be running for 40 years, 50 years in your career, even whether industry or academics. So you need to be able to make that long thing. It's you're not going to find a success quickly through the sprint kind of thing. It's like a marathon exercise. On top of that, I'm calling it a decathlon event because you need other skills. Sometimes you run for a long distance and you have to climb over a wall or swim or throw some javelin, like various.
Yeah.
So you need to have different skills. And typically in undergraduate, we don't train them on all those things. Even in graduate, if you do research, you get to see a little bit of this training. And so patience and persistence are important qualities for long-term success, and resilience and imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Particularly in this chat GPT era, everybody has access to knowledge. but I think creativity is still, AI hasn't quite captured it. It has captured it in a rudimentary way, but not in the truly innovative way, which I think humans still excel.
One of my musician friends says creativity is supposed to surprise you. Not just surprise you, but he says surprise him on stage. I
Yeah,
think AI by design, by the algorithms
yeah,
in
yeah,
there, is
yeah,
not designed to surprise you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. When it surprises you, it's wrong, actually. That's what we call hallucination, right? So,
Right.
yeah, it is, creativity, I think your friend is right in the sense it is a kind of hallucination, but it is a hallucination that makes sense in an extraordinary way. That is the surprise part,
Sure.
right? And in fact, that is the element of that is the essence of a joke. Also, if you think about it, the punchline usually is a surprise,
Yeah.
and that's why we laugh, and. So it needs to have that surprise element, but it is a surprise that makes sense, not it's not absurd.
Good. This has been a wonderful conversation, Professor Venkat. How did you go? I mean, what would students call you? Professor Venkat Venkatasubramanian was, I'm sure, a mouthful for some of your American friends. What would you popularly go by?
Yeah. So in the very first lecture, often I write down my entire name on the blackboard, and you know, I, s- there are 18 letters in the last name, and the first name is it's Venkataram, and that short form is Venkat. So I write Venkat, and then go on writing this last name. It keeps going and right after the 12th letter, people start laughing because it's still going. Then I tell my students um, that if you can spell this without aid, you get an A in the scores, and if you can pronounce it, you get an A plus. But everyone calls me Professor Venkat.
Very
So yeah,
nice.
Venkat. Yeah, yeah.
Let's sum up. We'll do 5 rapid fire questions.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Quantum mechanics or thermodynamics, which is more beautiful?
No question about it. It's quantum mechanics. Yeah. Thermodynamics has its own beauty, but quantum mechanics has a surprising beauty. There are lots of surprises.
Best advice Jeff Hinton gave you?
He didn't tell me in so many words, but I inferred it based on the way he conducted himself in research, which is that, look, this is a long haul journey. And um, just keep at it. It'll work out. And that's how he seemed to have led his thing. And it beautifully worked out for him. He won the Nobel Prize last
Sure.
year. So I kind of inferred that I knew that and this is why I mentioned that this is a decathlon event. It's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. You need a whole bunch of skills. It's a decathlon event. And then if you're patient, persistent, and resilient and imaginative, you'll be surprised by the outcome.
One thing about academia
Yeah.
that would surprise non academics?
I actually kind of get this from my friends who work in the industry, particularly in the business world in New York. New York is basically, I live in Manhattan, just 10 minutes away from Central Park. And we are surrounded by folks who work in Wall Street. It's New York is driven by essentially money. And their exposure to professors is, they've taken some courses as undergrads or in their MBA program. And so there is a particular view. So when they get to know me and find out that I have a lot of freedom in pursuing what I want to do, the kind of questions I want to think about, and that no one tells me what to do. I get up in the morning thinking about science, and I go to bed thinking about science, much to the complaints of my own family members, and that no one really tells me what to do. And that sort of intellectual freedom and career freedom, particularly true in the American universities, I think it comes as a big surprise to them because they all work on projects, they work in teams, and somebody tells them something to do. If they are consultants, They're solving the client's problems and then move on. So somebody is giving them a problem. So for me, nobody is giving me anything. I have to think of the problem and hopefully think of a good problem, that will have an impact.
If you could solve one more problem with math, what's the next problem that you think? What's the biggest problem out there?
To me, it is the mathematics of consciousness. What is consciousness, and is there a mathematical framework to understand it? I think we'll figure that out in the next 50 years for sure. More likely, probably 30. I would like to see it in 20 because I don't know
You'll be here in
how
30.
much runway is left for me. So ideally, I would like to see that in the 10 to 20 kind of a span. But I wouldn't be surprised if it happens after that. But then in the next 10, 20 years, we will make progress so that we'll start seeing glimpses of what that might look like. So it is self-organization and the emergence of consciousness in artificial intelligence. I think that's the one, which is what I'm working on.
Sure. If there is one book that changed your course of thinking, what would be one that you would recommend to?
Oh, that's a hard one. Different stages, different ones had a huge impact. I think in my freshman undergraduate, state at AC Tech, 1972-73 time frame, the book that really got me excited about physics was George Gamow's book on the 30 years that shook physics. It is, in fact, after my trip to Helgoland 2 weeks ago, I went back and read my copy again. It's a small book, maybe 100, 150 pages. It captures the quantum mechanics revolution. And so that got me really excited about physics. George Gamow was a gifted writer. He was a well-known physicist himself, but wrote a very nice one. So that one had a huge impact. And there have been some other books along the lines later on. But this is the one which got me going.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
In conclusion, in wrapping, what's the one piece of advice you'd like to give aspiring young faculty members?
Oh, be an eternal optimist. Day to day, there are always things, which don't go the way you want to see happen. There may be lots of disappointments along the way, but I think be an optimist, be resilient, be patient, and be persistent. That package, so the optimism captures all the other things. I think this is actually an exciting time to be doing research. It's an exciting time to be a scientist or an engineer. Imagine, an average undergraduate student knows more about the universe than Newton did, more about biology than Darwin did, more about chemistry than any of those, great chemists who lived before us. And if you're a grad student, one could say you in fact know more physics than even Einstein did, because quantum field theory is something he didn't know, and it is accessible to us. And certainly you know more about AI than Turing did. Think about that. I mean, Turing is the father of artificial intelligence. The greatest prize in computer science is called the Turing Award. And imagine knowing more about AI than Turing did. I think this is fantastic. You know more about the universe than Galileo did. It's stunning to me that there's so much is known, and it is available to you thanks to the internet and now ChatGPT and YouTube and all those. It is all you need is to put in some effort. Just you don't even have to go. I remember as a undergrad at AC Tech, I would regularly go for all the good books in the libraries. I would go to the British Council library, and then the USIS was open. It's not the threatening fort like setup they have now. It was, just walk through the gates and go. And then the United States Information Service had a fantastic library. Uh, the British Council had fantastic libraries. So we had to go to places to get books. Now everything is available to you right at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And it's stunning how much knowledge is available, how much you can actually know about all this, and it makes you marvel about look at the progress humanity has made scientifically in the last 400 years. And to me, to think that I know more physics than Newton did, and I know more physics than even Einstein did. I mean, the average grad student in physics knows more physics than Einstein did. That is stunning. We should be in awe of all that. Or like I said, how much biology we know more than um,
Darwin.
Darwin and or Mendel regarding genetics, and how much molecular biology that an average even undergraduate student in molecular biology would know compared to Watson and Crick. Okay, Watson is still around, so Crick, before he passed on. So it's absolutely an amazing time to be alive. We're extremely fortunate, I think, and we should all be in awe and wonder every day. And so and be optimistic as a result. Despite all this, imagine our ancestors go back by what the earliest human species is this specimen called Lucy, our everyone's grandmother. She was supposed to be 3 feet tall in Africa 5 million years ago. Imagine how unlikely everything for her long-term survival would have looked for those species. How hostile the environment was. Yet here we are, despite all the odds. Okay, so something up there or someone up there likes us. We made it this far, so I think we should be grateful and optimistic.
On that note, it's been a fascinating conversation. All good things have to come to an end, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Professor Venkat.
Thank you, Mahesh. Thanks for this kind invitation and all the generous remarks you said about me. Really appreciate this conversation. Gave me a chance to reflect about some of these things myself, which I haven't thought about it. Hopefully your viewers will find this somewhat helpful. Thanks again.
This has been another episode of the Professor Mahesh podcast with Professor Venkat Venkatasubramanian from Columbia University. This podcast is brought to you by IITM Global, an initiative of the Office of Global Engagement at IIT Madras. Thank you. Listen to this platform, listen to this information, and make informed career decisions. That's the single motivation of this podcast. In the meantime, until the next episode, be well, do good, and keep in touch. Goodbye.